Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Brittany Adams, and I'm the events coordinator here at Nerney. In this webinar, partner Ryan Nerney and associate Nora Ezzat Cozzillio will discuss the deferred resignation offer for federal employees, considerations for accepting the offer, and pending legal actions that may impact its trajectory. In order to cover all the planned material, we will keep all attendee microphones muted for the duration of the presentation, and we will take questions at the end. You may also leave any questions you have in the chat box, and we will review all questions we received at the end. This presentation is recorded, and a copy will be sent to all attendees afterward. I will now turn the mic over to Nora and Ryan to start today's presentation.
All right. As Brittany indicated, my name is Ryan Nerney. I'm the managing partner in the California office, and I'm joined today by Nora, who's an associate out of the DC office. Before we get started, I just want to put forth this disclaimer. This webinar is not intended to be legal advice. These views expressed in this publication are the authors and do not imply any endorsement by any government agency. Any government agency, we'll just say that. Moving on, I want to, obviously everybody who's on this call or this webinar has questions about this fork in the road email that everybody got. So I want to go over some of the basics and then I will turn everything over to Nora to add some context here. But essentially the basics, Brittany, can we go to the next slide? The basics of this email are that essentially a lot of people are calling this a buyout. It's not considered a buyout according to the actual email itself. It's what it is, a deferred resignation. So essentially the requirements for this is that you must voluntarily resign by Thursday, February 6th, which is tomorrow. All the duties and responsibilities will be immediately reassigned or eliminated, and that's the job of the agency. We'll get into a little bit more of that context in a second as far as potential agreements, a transition, out of your particular position, things like that. Employees who accept the offer do not have to work during this deferred time. So essentially what this would do is you would be placed on an administrative leave until September 30th, 2025. You will still retain all payments, benefits, anything like that. You will still accrue annual and sick leave time. And at the end of the deferred resignation period, you would be entitled to all of that paid out, just as you would be in the event that you were separating initially or from regular employment. Other aspects to this for the basics, as it was presented in this actual email, is that if you do want to accept this, you should follow at least according to the email, you should follow the directions to a T that are in that email. And that is, send an email to hr@opm.gov from your government account only. So this would only be accepted from your .gov or .mil account. Any other personal account, Gmail, Yahoo, whatever it is, would not be accepted. And then typing the word resign in the subject of the email and then hitting send. Those are the instructions, and that's essentially the basics for this particular aspect. Moving on to some considerations, Nora, you can take that aspect.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So naturally, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of concerns regarding this offer. Many people are confused whether that is a good offer for them. Obviously, it is not going to be the best option for every single federal employee. So with that said, there are some items that all federal employees should consider when deciding whether they want to accept this deferred resignation offer. For one, if you become eligible for early or normal retirement during this time, you may retire instead. You do not have to accept the deferred resignation offer. You can still go through that same process to seek retirement and still kind of go through those procedures in order to become fully retired from the federal government. It won't necessarily impact that. The resignation, it will not extend past September 30th. As of the guidelines that we have currently received, the government is not offering it to extend past that date. There are some questions whether it will be, whether that date will be moved up. But again, we don't totally know that. What we do know is that they are not willing to extend that resignation date past September 30th of 2025. Right now, there are also some questions regarding if a federal employee does accept the resignation, can they later rescind it? Can they change their mind afterwards? As of right now, the guidelines that we have received do not permit that. If you do accept the offer, it is binding. You cannot later take it back. So it will be considered your resignation. They will go forth and go ahead and process that, and you won't be able to take that back. Another consideration for a lot of our federal employees who are former service members or veterans is how your military buyback is impacted. Of course, your military buyback is how it applies to your federal service accrual to apply to your retirement. So if you do have the military buyback and you do choose to accept the deferred resignation offer, you must pay your military deposit in full by September 30th of 2025. If your deposit is not completed by then, your military service will not count towards your retirement. So it's very important to look at those specific factors for you and whether any of these apply to you to see whether that is the best option for you in accepting this deferred resignation. The other consideration, Brittany, you can move to the next slide, is for a lot of our clients and our federal employees who currently have complaints either with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or the Merit Systems Protection Board or any other of those agencies or tribunals that are currently pending. If you choose to accept the deferred resignation offer, if you have a current complaint in any of those tribunals, you will forfeit the continuation of the processing of those claims by accepting the deferred resignation offer. In essence, if you do choose that offer, you will sign an agreement that says that you will forfeit any actions that you currently have against that agency and any liabilities that you're going to impose against them. So if you choose to accept the offer, your EEO complaint, your MSPB appeal, anything like that will not be processed any further. Okay. And that also applies to any federal employees who have not instituted any actions against their agency, either again with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or the MSPB or any other of those tribunals. If you choose to accept the deferred resignation offer, again, with that same agreement, you will be forever waiving any employment discrimination claims, any employment disputes, anything like that against that agency forever. So you will not be able to reinstitute any of those actions or re-engage any of those actions after you accept this offer. So if you currently have a proceeding or a complaint that is going through that process, either it's in the formal EEO complaint phase, or you're at the hearing phase, or you're getting ready for your MSPB appeal, anything like that, this is something to really consider, because if you do accept this offer, you will not be able to move forward with that any further. Okay. Now, there are several legal challenges and questions that are currently pending as well regarding the legality of this deferred resignation offer. I think by the day, different civil liberties unions, federal employees unions are all instituting different actions to question the constitutionality and legality of this. So I'll turn it back to Ryan to discuss that a little more in depth.
Sure. And real quick, just to kind of touch on a little bit more of the considerations that Nora was talking about. The information that we're getting, you heard Nora reference that there's an agreement that's kind of circulating. This agreement was sent out as essentially it's kind of a template for agencies to use for via a memorandum they actually sent out a couple days ago, actually yesterday, that basically kind of circulates this. And the information that we're getting as far as what Nora was talking about with, current EEO, MSPB cases, other complaints, forfeiting those, it comes with that agreement that that they've been circulating. So that's where we're getting that information from. But as far as the legal challenges go, Obviously there's a few potential issues that could pop up. There have been some questions raised by federal unions and civil liberty organizations regarding the legality of this offer. There isn't necessarily any potential guidance per se, because things can change. However, the information that we have currently is that this, at least what OPM is indicating, is that this is legally binding, and that's one of the reasons that they're actually circulating this deferred resignation agreement. Because by signing that agreement, essentially, it's making it binding. There's assurances through this agreement, and most of what we're seeing, the agencies are going to have individuals who accept this deferred resignation to sign these agreements to kind of memorialize it, and honestly to kind of try and protect both the agency and the employee from any potential, for instance, if the government decides to backtrack on its commitments, which there's no indication they would at this point. They would be entitled to, request a rescission of their resignation pursuant to the agreement. Again, there's a template that we've seen a lot of agencies circulating through their employees at this point, and OPM, and it's from OPM, and OPM is kind of provided this guidance, if you will, or this template that most of the agencies we're seeing are actually using. So the legality of it comes back with this the legally binding agreement, just like any other employment agreement that you may have. The reason why they're doing that agreement is to try and shore off any potential concerns if this is actually legally binding or not. With that being said, there's no assurance if any of OPM's guidance or documents that employees will receive all payer benefits through September 30th, 2025, are solid at this point. One of the questions and concerns that we see is, all agencies have congressional funding through March 14th, 2025. How is that impacted? We see a lot of questions like that. According to the guidance that we have for that, it would be just like any other government shutdown. So you would still technically be considered an employee, just on administrative leave, be getting paid. So, just like any government shutdown, if there's a period of time where employees aren't getting paid, they would be able to get that back pay as soon as the government's funded through. So again, the most of what we're seeing at this point is that the agencies will have you sign an agreement, which would make this, legally binding, like any other, employment agreement. Nora, I can turn it back over to you for the what you should do aspect of this.
Sure. Yes. So of course, like Ryan and I kind of went over, this might not be best for you, right? It could be great for you. It really kind of depends on your situation. It depends on where you are in terms of your federal service, your years that you've committed to the federal service. It depends on kind of your ultimate employment goals. How close are you to retirement? Do you have any student loan repayments, or you're in a student loan repayment status with your programs? Any other benefits that might impact you and your family? So when evaluating this, those are all very valid considerations, and they weigh heavily on those decisions. So of course, when you're deciding what you should do, keep in mind that this is still very fresh. This is still very new. We're learning new things pretty much on a daily basis at this point, in terms of different guidelines, and different objectives that each agency is kind of putting out. As of yesterday, OPM just issued a different guideline that Ryan and I were taking a look at prior to this presentation. So a lot of this is still very fresh. We can't necessarily just, have a crystal ball and determine, what it will look like down the line. We are updating all of our advice as new information comes in. So of course, if you do have anything else that comes up on your side or anything like that, please consult with us, either contact us to schedule a consultation, or if you are represented by someone with our firm, please discuss that with your attorney, because every situation is very unique and very situational and subjective. So again, when you are deciding whether this is the right option for you, and again, I understand that the deadline is tomorrow, so some of these decisions have to be made quite quickly. Definitely take a look at kind of your situation, your benefits, whether that impacts you and your family, how close you are to retirement, particularly if you're already potentially, on current medical leave, right? And you're planning to apply for disability retirement, things like that are all going to be considerations for whether this is a good option for you. Okay. So now, Ryan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. Some of these concerns that we're talking about, and honestly, what Nora was saying is if this is best for you, potentially could be answered in the agreement or a agreement that would be placed in front of you, right? So as I mentioned before, OPM circulated a template agreement that I would say honestly a majority of agencies are using or likely to use, and that addresses some of the information in there. So if you decide to take this, or if you're contemplating it, take a look at the agreement and determine what the actual information is in there, what's being agreed to. And as Nora said, if you need assistance with that, to interpret or whatever, you can always seek assistance, for that. Now, that's pretty much all I have. I know that we got, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens of questions related to this. Some of these questions are we kind of answered. One thing I do want to just end with is that the deferred resignation is available to all full-time federal employees. This is except for military personnel of the armed forces, employees of the U.S. Postal Service, those in positions related to immigration enforcement like CBP, things like that, and national security. And they put kind of a designator at the end that those in any other position specifically excluded by your employee agency. So just to be clear, how we interpret that is that if you're a full-time employee that kind of meets, the guidance or the definition I just laid out, then you would be eligible for this. Now, going to a couple of the questions that we have, one of the questions that we got was if the Administration Leave Act says you get 10 days of pay, how do you get 7 months of administrative pay? So the Administrative Leave Act for this, it only applies to administrative leave for investigations. Anything outside of that, it's really kind of honestly up to the agency. So that makes it valid. So, and this is obviously not based upon any type of ongoing investigation. This is a voluntary, deferred resignation that you would be accepting. So that's how OPM's guidance is providing this, as far as any of those questions go. Another question we have is, we kind of already referenced this, but one of the things that we see here is reduction in force. So the benefits, if you take this deferred resignation, are you subject to a reduction in force or anything like that? From the current guidance we have, and actually this is based upon what we see in the actual circulated agreement, is that you would not be subject to any type of reduction in force. Essentially, you accept this, you would be able to, continue on in that administrative leave status, getting whatever pay you need or whatever pay you're getting, plus any benefits through that September 30th, 2025 date. So if there is any type of reduction in force, anything like that, the guidance we're seeing right now is that you wouldn't be subject to that. This deferred resignation would be in place through that time period. Nora, I know there's a couple other questions that we have, not a couple, but a lot. If you want to take a few of those.
Yes. So another question that we got, and we kind of touched on a little bit, was if I accept the offer and then OPM rescinds the offer, what recourse do I have? Which is a great question because there is that potential. So OPM actually released an additional guidance yesterday which actually said that, should, it says, were the government to backtrack on its commitments, an employee would be entitled to request a rescission of his or her resignation. So if that were to happen, or if there were any legal challenges that struck down the offer or anything like that, OPM does provide that should that occur, and potentially lead to them rescinding the offer, then an employee who did accept it can request a rescission of that resignation and be reinstated into their prior position. Of course, like I said, guidelines are being issued on the regular every single day, basically at this point. So should that change, we will of course advise you of that, and keep on the lookout for that. But that is what they are currently stating, is that you will have that opportunity to rescind your resignation to be reinstated back into your original position. The other question that we got, which is actually a very good one, is if I am currently a 100% teleworker, should I accept the offer if I don't want to return to work in person? Now, that's a great question because we're talking about two different executive orders, right? We're talking about the one that states that, all employees have to return to in-person work, excuse me. And then we also have the one that we're talking about with the deferred resignation. Now, again, this is really entirely up to your position, right? And your considerations. If you choose to accept the offer because you don't want to return to work in person, you can do that. Again, within mind all of the other elements and the items that Ryan and I have talked about, right? All of the other considerations that would apply to you specifically. Now, we will also be doing a webinar regarding the return to in-person work as well on February 19th, which will go over that executive order more in depth. But for the purposes of this webinar right now, because you are on a short stroke in order to meet that deadline by tomorrow, and there isn't really any guideline regarding rescinding that resignation as of right now. We can't necessarily say whether that's the best option for you, but keeping in mind that, again, you can't rescind the resignation once you accept it, and that there could be some different disputes down the line regarding whether they are going to maintain that pay status through September 30th. Okay, so definitely think about both of those items when deciding how you want to make this decision.
Yeah, and a few more questions that we see. So one of the questions that I saw here, Nora, was if I accept this offer, will I be prevented from future federal employment? The answer to that is no. And in fact, the guidance that we see here indicates that you can even, again, subject to any type of other, federal laws or individual agency policies, things like that, that you could potentially get a second job during this administrative leave period. But this would be a voluntary resignation. So we aren't seeing anything here that would prevent you from being able to get future federal employment at any point after. Another thing, I don't know if this was actually a specific question or not, but just to kind of address, one of the things that we saw in the circulated agreement was the agency's agreement to waive any debt owed by the employee, such as like recruitment incentive, student loan repayment, other service agreement. Again, this is in the circulated agreement that we have. So this leads us to believe that that is something that they would do. However, again, you have to make sure that you look at each agreement that is placed in front of you, if one is placed in front of you, to ensure that it is best for you and best for your actual situation. One more question, and then Nora can take a couple others. But one more question I see is: do you accrue annual leave and sick leave during this time? The answer to that is yes. So again, you would be considered on administrative leave with pay during this 8-month period. So you would be accruing any benefits, retirement benefits, annual leave, sick leave, be getting paid through that time period. We've even seen guidance recently where if you were doing automatic step increase during this time, that would be implemented as well during this period. So the answer to that is yes. And then at the conclusion of the the deferred resignation period, you would be paid out just as you would if you normally separate from employment. You would be paid out on all that leave, subject to obviously any laws or interagency policies. So that's kind of what we're seeing there. Nora, are there any other questions that you saw here? I know we got a plethora of them.
Yes, we sure do. And Brian, maybe you can touch on this one a little bit. How does this impact any probationary employees? I don't think there was anything in the guidelines that really mentioned anything about that, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, so what we see here, and like I indicated before, so this is if you are a full-time federal employee, with the exceptions of what I mentioned before, the military personnel, employees of USPS, immigration enforcement, national security, or anything else like that. If you're a full-time employee, then you would be eligible for that. So what we're seeing here, there's nothing that is preventing any probationary employees from being able to accept this. You just have to make sure that you meet those requirements. So no, if you're a probationary employee, there should not be you should not be prevented from being able to do this as long as you're a full-time federal employee. Again, with those exceptions that you should be fully able to accept this if that is your desire.
Excellent. Okay, and I know that we. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead, Nora. No, go ahead, Nora.
Oh, no, I was just going to touch back. I know we talked about this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but if I am eligible to retire and I accept the resignation offer, can I still retire before September 30th of 2025? Yes, you can. You can accept the offer and kind of begin that retirement application process if you're eligible, of course, right? So you can go through that process and still accept the offer, particularly if that retirement would occur before September 30th of 2025. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to kind of touch on that as well. So one of the questions we got was, if you haven't reached your actual retirement age or the time in service period by tomorrow, will you still accrue that time? And the guidance that we're receiving right now is yes. So again, you would still technically be considered a federal employee up until September 30th, 2025. So any benefits, any, time and grade, anything like that, during that period of time, you would still accrue that same amount, up until September 30th. So for instance, if let's say your 20th anniversary is, I don't know, August 1st, you accept the deferred resignation, you would meet that 20-year time period on August 1st, and then you would still have obviously the ability to still retain your employment through the deferred resignation period up till September 30th, 2025. One thing that I want to raise is I practice the security clearance side of things as well. One thing I want to raise is kind of we've got a couple questions, or I've got a couple questions related to, if you accept this, how would this impact your security clearance if you have one? That is kind of up in the air at this point, because it is kind of dependent on your agency. Without getting too much in the weeds, for anybody who has a security clearance, you need to retain sponsorship for that security clearance. So one thing that potentially could happen is, although you would still technically be employed through September 30th, 2025, if you do not have a need for that security clearance, what potentially could happen is your agency could potentially withdraw sponsorship. And withdrawing sponsorship for a clearance is not the same thing as, obviously removing you from employment or anything like that. Now, again, that's just speculation, but that's a possibility that potentially could happen. Or you could just retain your clearance through September 30th, 2025, subject to any, eligibility requirements, thereafter. You potentially could still retain your eligibility, which is different than an active security clearance. But again, I'm not going to get in the weeds on that. It's just a question I just kind of wanted to address, because I did receive a couple of those questions, throughout the week, as far as how it would impact your security clearance. So the answer is, we don't necessarily know, and it's kind of up to your agency. But there could potentially be an impact. It kind of is a case-by-case basis, as is with all other aspects of this process here.
Now, another question we also got was, if I do not accept the deferred resignation offer, will I just be terminated after that deadline? The short answer is there's nothing in the guidelines that say that. There's nothing with anything that OPM has administered or any agencies that we've seen, at least, that are saying if you don't accept this, you will be fired. There's nothing to suggest that as of yet. Again, things could change. We have not seen anything that says that. Obviously, there's a lot of concerns with probationary employees or new employees of the federal service who kind of presume that because they were kind of the last in, they're the first out. Again, we have not seen anything like that. No guidance from, we're getting guidances from specific agencies as well as OPM, and we are analyzing it as soon as they are administered and issued. We have not seen anything to that effect that says, it's either you choose to resign or you will be terminated. So I wouldn't necessarily think of that when you're deciding whether to accept the offer. Ultimately, it kind of goes back to what we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, what works best for you and your situation, and kind of what your goals are in terms of your federal service. So I know that that's a big question that's been kind of, I think, airing out, particularly as it's been discussed in the news a lot. But that is not something that we have seen in anything that has been issued, agency-wide.
Yeah, Nora, did you touch on the voluntary early retirement authority?
I have not, no, not yet.
Okay, so essentially one of the questions that we see is, or saw or received is, does my agency have VERA for employees who opt to take the deferred resignation offer? So the guidance that we currently have is yes. So employees who are eligible for the deferred resignation offer and who meet the requirements, for VERA, are eligible for that. Obviously, you would have to make sure that you, meet the requirements. This webinar is not about these requirements at this point. But again, if you meet those requirements, you can still decide to do that. And I believe that was also in the agreement as well, where they specifically mentioned this, as an option, essentially not preventing the employee from retiring from federal service, using the voluntary early retirement authority. So again, it's important to, if you do have an agreement in front of you, it's important to understand, what that agreement says. Before you actually sign it or enter into any type of situation there. One of the questions I saw, and just to kind of touch on this as well, as far as the guidance to accept this. So there's been circumstances, I think I touched on this a little bit, but I just want to reiterate. So there's been circumstances where individuals who maybe are on indefinite suspension or on leave and don't necessarily have access to their government emails, their agencies are forwarding the emails to them, basically asking for a response. The guidance again that we receive is that you have to, essentially follow it to a T, and send an email to the HR@opm.gov from your government account only. That's the guidance that we have at this point. So if you are contemplating or going to accept this, you want to make sure that you follow the guidance that was in that initial email from January 28th, because we haven't received any other guidance outside of that.
Okay. And just along the same lines as VERA, which Brian just talked about, which is the voluntary early retirement, is some individuals have asked about FERS disability, which is the federal employee retirement system, whether they can apply for disability retirement during this time. Same thing. You can still kind of move forward with that process if you qualify for that. Of course, if you're following those guidelines, and to make sure that you do qualify for disability retirement, you can still accept the offer and move towards that as well. As Ryan and I have said multiple times, you know, you will still be considered a federal employee up until September 30th of 2025. So during this time, if you want to accept that offer while you are working towards your first disability retirement and applying for that, knowing that it can take several months for that to be decided and thoroughly reviewed, you can do that. That is an option for you. So you can accept the offer and still kind of move towards your first disability retirement if you're already within that process.
And Nora, did you touch on what happens if you have a retirement date after September 30th?
Nope, I was just going to lead to that. So
Sure. Well, you can go ahead. Take it.
No, you go ahead.
All right. So the guidance that we currently have from OPM is that if your retirement date is between October 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2025, you're still eligible for the deferred resignation. And if your retirement dates are within that window, then your deferred resignation date will be extended to match that retirement date. That's the guidance that we currently have right now from OPM. So essentially, yes, if you're within that window. Anything beyond that, you know, there's really no guidance on that. That may be something that you'd have to work out with your agency, you know, to see if that's possible. But right now, the guidance that we receive from OPM is that it's within that window, that short window thereafter to get to the end of the year for 2025. Anything else you want to add to that, Nora?
Nope, you handled that beautifully. I actually think that we have some questions in the chat, I think, Ryan, if we want to take a look at some of those. I think Brittany's going to send some of those.
Sure, go for it.
Okay,
Kind
so
of
I think,
answered the
Ryan,
majority of these.
yeah, I think there's some questions about some of the pending lawsuits for this. You know, we don't have a lot of information about that yet. As you can imagine, lawsuits, particularly of this size and this caliber, will take some time to be thoroughly reviewed and decided upon. So while those actions have been instituted regarding, again, the constitutionality and legality of, you know, the deferred resignation offer, everything is still in place. Since nothing has been decided yet, you know, the offer is still considered valid. You can still accept that and kind of go through that process as dictated by OPM until we learn more. If there is a decision that will be decided on that or has been issued regarding that, either sustaining it or, you know, striking it down, something like that, you know, of course, like there will be an additional analysis and assessment regarding that. And we can, you know, we'll be able to provide a little bit more, you know, specific advice on that. As of right now, nothing's been decided. Again, it'll take some time. You know, these things always do. So right now it is still considered valid. The deadline is still tomorrow. That won't change that. And, you know, we will continue to move forward as we have that information currently. Of course, again, if anything else comes out later, we will adjust our advice of that or adjust our assessment on that. But as of right now, nothing's been decided. Nothing probably will, I would say probably at least the next month or so. You know, again, the cogs of the federal court system do move a little slowly, but you know, when that comes out, there will be a better advice that we can provide.
One thing I also want to touch on as well, again, this is kind of based upon the agreement that was circulated. So one of the things that they put in there is that the employee agrees to continue working through February 28th, 2025. So even though the resignation, you know, would need to be responded to by essentially tomorrow, the agencies, now this could be adjusted obviously depending on the agency's need and things like that, but the agencies are expecting a work through February 28th just to ensure a smooth transition. As Nora said at the outset, one of the things they have to do is they have to reassign any tasks, any assignments, anything like that. So they want to make sure, when I say they, I mean OPM and the agencies want to ensure that there's a smooth transition. So all of that happens. And if there's anything that you as an employee need to, you know, do or provide, then, you know, that would give them the time to do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Another piece of advice that, I think that we've been kind of, providing with our clients, and potential clients is, requesting your EOPF file. Particularly if you want to accept this deferred resignation, it's always good to have that in your possession, right? Knowing that potentially may take some time. It's always just good to have that. So, in case you do want to return back to federal service, right, that's always good to kind of have that within your possession so that you can see what has been included in there, and the documents and everything like that. So just as a general protection, it's always good to have that. And so that you understand exactly what is in your file in case you are seeking reinstatement at another time, or if you want to return back to federal service, it's always just good to have that, particularly if you are going to do the deferred resignation offer, and you just kind of want to understand exactly what is in your file. So that is something as well that I think it would be a good option.
Another question that I've seen a number of times in the chat is, what if you're not offered, or what if you don't get this agreement, right? So like we keep referencing the agreement and the deferred resignation agreement, the template that OPM was circulating, things like that. What if you don't get the agreement? Well, if you don't get the agreement, then obviously there's no there's no clauses or anything memorialized in writing. The only thing that must happen according to the OPM guidance is that you have to respond by tomorrow if you want to accept or not. If you don't respond because you haven't received an agreement or anything like that, then you can't go back on, let's say, February 7th and say, I want to do this, because you would have missed your chance essentially. So again, I mean, an agreement is only valid if it's signed and executed. So if you haven't received the agreement, then obviously you wouldn't necessarily be subject to the clauses in the agreement, or some of the clauses in the agreement that we've been discussing. But again, the clauses in the agreement that we're discussing are based upon the guidance that we've been receiving and reviewing from OPM. So even though it's not memorialized in writing, it is the guidance that OPM is providing at this point regarding various different things that we discussed. So again, I mean, obviously, if it's not a valid agreement if one's not signed, but again, the deadline is tomorrow. So if you do want to accept it, if that is something that you're contemplating, you need to make sure that you follow, those instructions. Potentially the agency may give you the agreement, at a later date, maybe a few days later, something like that. But if you miss the deadline to respond tomorrow, then you're out of luck.
Absolutely. Ryan, I've gotten some question. Well, there's one question in the chat that says, if you did accept the resignation, but you have not yet signed the agreement, are you still bound to it? That is yes. The agreement is really to kind of memorialize what you're agreeing to, and what you have accepted. So the first step is really to, as Ryan said before, sending the email from your government email address to OPM saying resign, so that they can kind of put you on that list that they have and kind of begin processing that, you accepting the deferred resignation offer. What will come afterwards is that agreement that kind of memorializes all of that memorializes exactly what you have agreed to. So even if you haven't gotten that agreement yet, but you have accepted resign, or you have accepted this offer, then you are still bound to it. You can no longer rescind that as of the guidelines that we have been researching and reviewing. The agreement will come after to memorialize it. Very similar to other kind of contracts where you kind of agree in principle, and then that written agreement is sent to you later for your review. It's very similar to that, right? So even if you haven't gotten the agreement yet, but you have accepted this offer, you are bound to that offer. Yep. Anything to add to that, Ryan?
Nope.
Okay, just combing through the other questions. We're getting them by the second here. Ryan, there is a question about whether if their specific agency hasn't issued a guideline.
I mean, then OPM would, the guidance that OPM provided would really be the guidance that you would need to go by. Some agencies haven't really touched this, but again, if you receive that email as a full and you meet the eligibility requirements, that is something that, you just need to make sure that you follow the guidance from OPM. But to be perfectly frank, most of the guidance that you receive from the agency is going to be based upon what OPM provides. Obviously, if you have questions about that individually or for your individual situation, you can, reach out. But, if there's any questions or if you haven't received any of that guidance, like I said, I mean, OPM really would be the one to really follow at that point anyways.
Right. Another question is, if I don't accept this deferred resignation offer, can I still retire normally? Yes, you'll still be a federal employee. You'll still be pursuant to, as long as you meet those requirements, right? Either under VERA or normal retirement, everything else will be normal. So if you choose not to accept it and you want to move forward with regular retirement or VERA, you can absolutely do that. There is no requirement that you have to accept this offer. It's really if it's the best option for you. So otherwise, if you don't, you'll still just be a federal employee and you'll still be bound to your current duties and responsibilities.
Yeah, one thing, one of the questions that we got, we kind of touched on this, but I just want to make sure we clarify it. So if somebody's eligible to retire now, but plan for their retirement to be the 31st of December 2025, if they accept the deferred resignation, will they get full pay and benefits through December 31st, 2025? The answer is yes. So again, according to the guidance that we received, if you're scheduled to retire between October 1st and December 31st, 2025, essentially the deferred resignation date will be extended to match that retirement date. So then you would be able to get all the benefits and pay throughout that time period if your retirement date is the 31st of December of this year.
Okay. Let's see what other ones.
There's a lot of questions.
Yes, lots coming in literally by the second. One person, I understand like some people joined late, so we did go over this at the beginning, but there was a question here about if you had a pending EEO matter in a federal court. If you do have a pending EEO matter or any sort of complaint with the agency, and you do accept the deferred resignation offer, you will forfeit the right to continue moving forward with that complaint. The same as if you haven't yet filed any sort of EEO matter or MSPB matter or anything with any tribunal, and you accept the deferred resignation offer, you will waive all of those claims against the agency. So if you do currently have a matter against the agency, federal court, any type of tribunal, and you do accept this, you will forfeit that right. That is in the agreement that Ryan and I chatted about earlier, that would be sent after you accept the offer, which basically says you will forfeit the right to continue with any sort of current complaints, and that you will also waive the ability to pursue any future complaints against the agency in regards to your employment. So I just wanted to go over that again, because I know that there were some attendees who joined a little late.
So one of the questions we kind of touched on a little bit before, but didn't necessarily go into too much detail is if you were on leave or are on leave and during the time period from essentially the January 28th to tomorrow, and you didn't have enough time to evaluate or accept the deferred resignation letter, can that be extended? You are entitled to request an extension for that specific reason. And it's essentially the guidance we receive is the agency may grant reasonable extensions. So how we interpret that is they they don't necessarily have to, but they may grant an extension if it's a situation like that. For all intents and purposes, that's a question that you can, ask your agency HR individuals for the specific agencies, on if an extension is allowable. But absent any unique circumstance like that, if you miss the February 6th deadline, then again, like I said before, you're out of luck. So for instance, if you decide, on February 7th that you want to resign, expecting to get the deferred resignation opportunity, you won't be able to do that.
Okay. Now, Ryan, we got a question in the chat for someone asking if if they're currently pending a disciplinary action, but they accept the offer. Does that purge their record? Now, I know OPM issued guidelines regarding still placing people on administrative leaves because that kind of goes to the discretion of the agency. Now, what does that do if someone is pending any sort of disciplinary action?
Do you know?
I potentially might know. I'm just questioning you, making sure you know.
So, the guidance that we have, if they're pending disciplinary action, if you accept this, the guidance that we have as the agency is not going to be able to, for instance, if you get a proposal or something like that, if you haven't actually been removed, you'd be able to accept this, and the agency wouldn't be able to remove you. There are, I believe, some exceptions to that, which is if there's any criminal behavior or anything along those lines, which would, cause you to, be terminated, normally like that. I can't think of an example right now, but if there's any type of criminal behavior, in the workplace or something that, that would be an exception. But if you haven't actually been removed at this point, and you do the resignation, all the guidance that we see, at least at this point, is that you'd be eligible for this. Is that your interpretation, Nora?
That is my interpretation. Spot on. Okay. Let's see. I know
we got about 8 minutes left, so let's see if we can get a few more questions in here.
I think there's a security clearance question, Ryan. I'll read it out to you. If you have a 24-month break in service, your clearance will go inactive and you will need to be initiated for a new clearance, provided your next position requires one.
Technically, that's true. It's a case-by-case basis, but technically, yes. So, I mentioned before the difference between eligibility and an active clearance. Obviously you need to retain sponsorship and things like that. Essentially, yes, there is a 24-month break in service, but I've seen on a number of occasions where, even if there's just been a month or two of a break in service, agencies sometimes still wants you to fill out a standard Form 86 and still go through that entire process. So, and other times I've seen agencies just pick it up and say, pick up sponsorship and say you're good to go. So it really kind of depends on the situation. It depends on, what, transition or what the agency is, but essentially, yes. So, there's a difference between eligibility versus an actual active clearance. If you are not actually using your clearance, you don't have a sponsor or anything like that, technically you would still have your eligibility, but you wouldn't have an active clearance. There's a lot more intricacies to that. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us. But essentially, that's kind of the general gist.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about if an employee is placed on administrative leave and while they accept this. OPM did address this in their guideline that they issued yesterday, which is, essentially the decision to grant administrative leave rests with the agency's discretion. So you can be placed on administrative leave even if you do accept this offer. So that can happen. There is the 10-day rule, right? Where, they can't be placed on an administrative leave for more than 10 total working days. But that can still happen even if you accept the resignation. Because again, the deferred resignation is really, you're choosing, if you think about it, you're choosing ahead of time that you want to resign by September 30th, 2025, right? So during this time, you're still a federal employee. You're still receiving your benefits. You're still receiving your pay. But you're just not actively working. For some individuals, I believe that the guidance suggests that you could be working intermittently. It does depend on the agency, so please check with your agency guidelines on that, particularly if your position. But you still will be considered a federal employee up until the resignation date, which is September 30th of 2025.
Yeah, to add to that, just to be clear, the 10 days is usually or specifically for like investigations. So as Nora pointed out, the agencies have discretion to, put anybody on administrative leave with pay for, longer than that. And obviously, as I think I mentioned this at the outset, this is obviously not based upon an investigation. This is a voluntary deferred resignation. So, it's at the agency's, discretion. One of the questions I see, so could the agency still force you to work during the deferred resignation? So the guidance that we see now is that you would still need to work. And again, this is based upon the agreement that we see, which is, kind of what OPM is their guidance at this point. But, if you submit the or take the deferred resignation program, they do expect you to work through February 28th, so you can kind of make that smooth transition like we referenced before. After that, I don't see anything as far as continuing to work. A lot of times, the reason why they have that period of February 6th to the 28th, which is what we're seeing right now, is because it gives the agency an opportunity to reassign tasks and things like that, like I mentioned before. So, if you don't have any tasks or anything to do, I can't fathom that the agency would want you to, work on anything, that would most likely cause you to get up to speed or anything like that. So again, the guidance that we're seeing at this point is that, no, after, that transition period, that you wouldn't have to do anything. And again, I mean, you wouldn't be subject to the return to work. If you are teleworking, you accept this deferred resignation, you wouldn't be subject to that based upon the guidance that we're seeing as well. Not sure if that was a question or we addressed that, but that's also something that I think is important to address.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're wrapping up. There are several questions in the chat and that we've received prior to the webinar regarding the return to in-person work. I just want to let everyone know that we will also be doing another webinar directly on that on February 19th, so 2 weeks from today. So if you want to attend that one, we will be going over that executive order in more detail. So please go to our website to register for that webinar so that you don't miss out on that. And I believe that we will also be sending that out. So if you registered for this one, we will be sending that invitation out via email as well. So if you have any questions, definitely tune in for that. And you can also, again, submit questions ahead of time so that we can pre-screen those and review those prior to that webinar as well. But I think I speak for Ryan and myself for thank you everyone for attending today. Of course, if you have any specific questions that you want to follow up on, our contact information is on the screen. You can contact us to schedule a consultation and we can go over your specific employment needs and employment questions.
Absolutely. Thank you everybody for attending, and thank you Nora for presenting with me today. And like Nora said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you again, Nora and Ryan, for presenting today's webinar. This webinar was recorded and a copy will be sent to all attendees afterward. Have a great day.